Hello, everyone. We'll give people just another minute to get in the room while we get our slides up on the screen. If you could just drop in the chat if you can see the slides okay, that'd be appreciated. Oh, I see a bunch of thumbs up. Excellent. All right, then we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this webinar today on familial domestic servitude. My name is Rhianna Nicely. I'm Policy and Research Partnerships Officer with Unseen UK, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Juliet Odaro. For those of you who don't know us, Unseen is a national charity based in Bristol. We provide direct support to survivors of modern slavery through the Victim Care Contract, and we run the UK Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline, which we'll definitely be talking about today as a key signpost for anyone affected by exploitation. Please be aware that we will be recording so that we can share the webinar on YouTube, so please keep your cameras off during the presentations. We will stop the recording for the Q&A session at the end, so feel free to unmute yourself and turn off your camera at that time to ask any questions you might have. Today is all about familial domestic servitude, but our focus on the domestic servitude is part of a larger national lottery-funded project that we're running to engage hard-to-reach communities at risk of exploitation and providing them with guidance on how to protect themselves and how to seek help if needed. This work is co-produced with the Unseen Survivor Consultants, some fantastic people we work with who have lived experience of modern slavery, using their insights about exploitation that often go unnoticed, along with the data from the Modern Slavery Helpline on emergent trends. We will be engaging 15 communities over 5 years, and familial domestic servitude is our second community. We have used the Greater West Midlands as a focal point for initial stakeholder engagement, but the materials produced for this community are relevant to stakeholders and beneficiaries across England. Domestic servitude is a form of modern slavery in the UK and the most under-identified. So we thought it useful to start off with a quick outline of what modern slavery is and what it looks like in the UK. Modern slavery is a crime that happens all around us all the time, but lots of people don't know about it. They might see some of the signs and know that something isn't right, but they might only notice a few things and not know what's going on behind the scenes. So it's very under-recognized. It is also underreported because people are afraid of what will happen if they tell someone that they're being exploited. Other people might see some signs of it happening, but worry that if they report, they would be overreacting or make things worse for the person in a harmful situation. And it's hidden in plain sight. When people hear the term modern slavery, they sometimes think this must mean that people are locked up and hidden away from view. But victims and survivors are often out in public workplaces, working alongside colleagues who have no idea that they're being controlled and exploited, because they're being controlled by often invisible things such as debt, threats to themselves or their families, or control of their documents. Is everybody seeing a slide that says someone is in slavery if they are? I see somebody is saying the slides are behind. Okay. Might be some technical issues on personal ends. Do feel free to exit the webinar and come back if you think restart might be helpful, but it looks like most people are okay. Oh, hang on one sec. Did that fix it for anything? Okay, I'm seeing thumbs up, so I'll go ahead and continue. Modern slavery is an umbrella term that encompasses the crimes of slavery, servitude, forced labor, and human trafficking. It's any work or service that someone is forced to do under the threat of some form of punishment. Someone can be said to be in a situation of modern slavery if they are forced to work, if they are owned or controlled by an employer, if they are treated as a commodity, or if they have restrictions made on their freedoms. There is an estimated 130,000 people living in a situation of modern slavery in the UK at any given time. Every year, more and more people are identified and facilitated into support through what's called the National Referral Mechanism. Last year, there were over 23,000 people referred for support. What this tells us is that we're getting better at identifying victims and getting them entry into support, but as you can see, we're still very far short of that 130,000 people we need to reach. How prevalent is domestic servitude? Well, like domestic abuse, the actual numbers recorded in data are estimated to be much lower than reality. But due to the nature of domestic servitude, it is difficult to gauge exactly how much is going on. I've pulled together some data from two different resources to give a glimpse into what we are or are not seeing. I'll start with data from our own Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline. The 2025 Helpline Annual Assessment reported 115 cases of domestic servitude involving 161 potential victims, or PVs. This is an increase from 2024's 100 cases with 116 PVs. These calls made up 6% of cases and 3% of PVs in 2025. Of these PVs, the top recruitment methods were through familial relations or intimate partner or marriage propositions. False promises or statements were the third most prevalent method, but our data does not specify what these promises involved, as they can vary greatly by case. Home Office also releases statistics for the National Referral Mechanism. In 2025, the statistics reported 23,411 cases. Of these cases, only 480 referrals were purely for domestic servitude. That's 2% of NRM referrals. 1,635 referrals were for domestic servitude combined with another type of modern slavery. That's 7% of referrals. I do want to stipulate that these statistics do not differentiate between cases involving those on the overseas domestic worker visa, those perpetrated by family, or other scenarios. So not all of these numbers reflect our target community. However, you can see that when it comes to domestic servitude cases, both the helpline and the NRM statistics reflect low, likely underreported numbers, with the NRM showing proportionally lower reporting compared to helpline when it comes to purely domestic servitude situations. We can also see that domestic servitude has a significantly higher chance of being identified if it's combined with another form of modern slavery, which would be more visible. Hand over to my colleague Juliet for the next part. Juliet, you might be on mute.
Sorry, I was just talking. Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Rihanna. So let's talk about domestic servitude versus domestic abuse. So domestic servitude can easily be misidentified as or hidden by domestic abuse, but there are notable overlap between the two, but can both be happening at the same time. Domestic servitude is characterized as a form of forced labor within the residential setting, while domestic abuse is an incident or a pattern of incidents of abusive behavior between two people over the age of 16 who are personally connected. So if a person is under 16, it falls under child abuse legislation. So as you can see, there is a lot of overlap in this definition. Control method for domestic servitude includes things like financial control, which is also considered abusive behavior under the domestic abuse definition. Moving on to the next slide, domestic servitude. Other ways they both overlap include coercion and threat, physical, sexual, emotional abuse, control of finances, control of access to or monitoring of technology, social isolations, even using children as a control method, and many more. What do we mean by familiar domestic servitude? Familiar domestic servitude is when someone is made to carry out excessive domestic work by a partner, their in-laws, or even their own families. This is not by choice, but because they are under threat or coercion to do so. So this can include things like cooking, cleaning, childcare, gardening, you name it, looking after extended elderly or disabled family members, working long hours in the house, in a home without rest, or even sometimes food, having no control over money or daily life or where they go to. At first glance, it may appear that to be a typical household arrangement, but the crucial difference is that the victims are forced or pressured into carrying out these duties rather than choosing to do them freely, and they are being threatened with consequences if they refuse or if they attempt to leave. Why we choose to focus on familiar domestic servitude is with this community because as you can see with the helpline data, the largest recruitment method for domestic servitude was through relations, and second largest was through intimate partners. So additionally, the overseas domestic worker visa is already under scrutiny due to some recent high-profile cases. Moving on to how to spot the signs. Spotting the signs. There are many indicators to look out for, and as mentioned earlier, several of them they will always overlap with those that present in domestic abuse situation. So this is hardly an extensive list of indicators, and one of the two may not indicate domestic. One or two may not indicate domestic servitude, but it's also important to notice them, track how many there are, and what the severity is, and try to find out if they interlink to create a bigger picture. There may be physical or health indicators such as poor hygiene, signs of malnutrition, injuries, or constant tiredness. Also, look out for behavioral indicators which may present as being withdrawn, avoiding eye contact when it is not part of the culture to do so. Looking to another person to answer a question, fear of the authorities. Some major indicators to look out for can also, as a control method, can also be like someone is controlling a person's identity, documents, or even having restricted mobility. And if their day-to-day reality consists of excessive domestic work and lack of freedom. I'll hand over to Rihanna.
Yeah, thanks, Juliet. So we've talked a lot about indicators of familial domestic servitude and the overlap with domestic abuse. Now we're going to put that knowledge to the test. This activity will consist of 3 case studies. I'll read them out loud and then give you a few minutes to put answers to the following questions in the chat. Are they domestic servitude or domestic abuse? What indicators led you to that conclusion? And did you notice anything else? As with any case study depicting violence, it's important to keep an eye on your own mental well-being. If these studies cause any stress, please do take a moment to step away from your computer and rejoin us once this activity is finished. So case study 1. After giving birth, a woman told her partner she wasn't comfortable having sex due to postpartum pain. However, he forced her to sleep with him on a daily basis when he arrived home from work, drunk and demanding. At family gatherings, though, he acted the part of a devoted husband and father. She had no money because her partner controlled her finances. He told her she needed to have sex with him in order to buy basic necessities. Her mental health severely declined. Her partner attended all her medical appointments and ensured she did not have a chance to disclose her experiences. She was only allowed to leave the house to take her children to school. So go ahead and drop in the chat if you think this is domestic servitude, domestic abuse, what indicators led you to that decision, and if you noticed anything else. All right, so I'm seeing mostly domestic abuse, citing the controlling, emotional, sexual, and financial behavior. I see a couple people with domestic servitude with the expected sex in exchange for money, but in domestic servitude situations, the expectation is that they will be performing household labor. So their purpose is becoming labor. So this is a domestic abuse case. Will provide the outcomes for each case study so that you know where these ended up, because each case study kind of on the slide leads off at a very negative point. So for this woman, she eventually fled with the help of the police and a domestic abuse charity. She spent 3 months in a refuge before moving to a rented house. The police prosecuted her ex, who pleaded guilty to rape and was sent to prison. She's now a qualified dentist and volunteers to support other survivors who have been affected by domestic abuse. So we'll go on to the next one. A woman marries a man in the UK and moves from her home country to join him. However, her new husband is distant and unfriendly with her. When she arrives, her father-in-law arranges for her to work, but she had to hand over all her salary to him. She was not allowed to speak to her family back home without supervision. Generally, her new husband ignored her, but there was one instance where he drugged and sexually assaulted her. When she managed to tell her family about her situation, her father-in-law found out and got her fired from her job. She was then forced to do all the housework without being fed and fearing for her safety. So go ahead and drop your answers in the chat again. All right, I am seeing quite a bit of people saying both. Somebody's even said here domestic abuse from the husband and domestic servitude from the father-in-law. So yes, this is both. It's unclear in the case study that we had whether the husband was also benefiting or expecting her labor, but it was prosecuted as domestic servitude. Even with the domestic abuse signs, there's also signs of labor exploitation in here where her father-in-law forced her to work and took her salary. It's only after he got her fired and forced her to work in the house that it turned into domestic servitude. For this outcome, concerned friends of hers managed to get her a mobile phone, and she was able to arrange for her uncle, who lived in the UK, to come take her away. Luckily, she was able to keep her passport and go back home, but her in-laws are withholding the wages they took from her, and her husband has refused to return to India to go through the divorce proceedings that put her life on hold. I do want to stipulate that this case study is a few years old, so likely things have changed for her. Hopefully things have changed for her in that time. Case study 3. A woman entered an arranged marriage with a man with initially high hopes for the match. She was well educated and moved to the UK, looking forward to a new future. However, once married, she was told that he had married her so that she could look after his mother and his home. She was forced to cook, clean, do the washing, and look after other family members, usually from 5 a.m. to midnight. She was beaten, subject to demeaning text messages, restricted from leaving the house alone, socially isolated, and generally not allowed to do anything that she wanted. Answers in the chat. Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of DS and some DS and DA. Officially, this is just domestic servitude because her purpose to this partner and family is explicitly for her to do this housework. There's no expectation of relationship really like between her and the partner, despite what's being on paper. For her outcome, she came to police attention after neighbors saw her outside the family home in just a dress and flip-flops before her husband dragged her back inside by her hair. Once arrested, he admitted to enforced domestic servitude, which he was jailed for 2 years, and assault causing bodily harm, for which he received an 8-month term served concurrently. It's important to note that while each of these case studies involved a woman as the potential victim, and frequently a non-UK national, familial domestic servitude can happen to anyone, women or men, UK or foreign nationals, straight or LGBTQ, able-bodied or disabled. Conversations with stakeholders have also shown that additional recruitment methods seen more in cases of UK nationals are to secure access to drugs or to avoid homelessness. Back over to Juliet. Juliet, you're on mute again.
Yes, thank you, Rihanna. Thank you. As a first responder, you have a statutory duty to identify and report modern slavery, which includes securing informed consent from the potential victim to refer into the NROM, or if no consent is given, to complete a duty to notify submission. You can scan the QR code for more details on first responder statutory duty to and guardians. So when speaking to potential victim, try to speak to the person alone and in a safe space. Don't use partners or family members as interpreter. Make sure you always use a professional. Be calm, non-judgmental, and be patient. Adding to that, you have to mind your body language because it speaks a lot. Avoid framing it as just a relationship issue. Explain a valuable support. Provide them the modern slavery exploitation helpline contacts. Always keep in mind that it is always important to consider if you are providing the person, the potential victim, information in a safe way. If an exploiter becomes aware of your intervention, they might even escalate their control or punishment method. So if someone you have concern about is unwilling to speak to you and feel free and you feel like you want them to get another opportunity to speak to them, you won't get another opportunity to speak to them. Always provide them with the modern slavery and exploitation helpline contact information so they can reach out when they are ready and able to do so. Handing over to Rihanna.
As part of this project, we've developed a professional guide on familial domestic servitude, which covers everything we've discussed here today and more. You can access it by following the QR code on screen or the links that I've just dropped in the chat. We're also creating posters and flyers that can be placed in public spaces or handed to potential victims. These will be available in English as well as languages associated with communities at higher risk of familial domestic servitude based on helpline and NRM data. Those will be available on our hub post once they're ready. For more questions about what to do as a professional, see our professionals FAQ page. To improve your own or your team's training on modern slavery and first responder duties, check out our training options. And for a quick resource to always have on hand, you can download our app, which includes signs to spots and the direct ability to contact the helpline. On this slide, you can see the phone number, web address, and web address for contacting our helpline, which you can share with potential victims. The helpline is confidential, free to contact, and available in 200 languages. If you have any questions about the project or ideas for how we can better support professionals in identifying potential victims and getting them support, please feel free to send us an email at policyandresearch@unseenuk.org. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll now stop the recording so we can move on to the Q&A session.